By the last week of September, the high country had already begun to sharpen its teeth. At dawn, frost silvered the bunch grass along the creek. By noon, a hard white sun hung over the Wyoming hills without giving much warmth. After dark, the wind came down from the mountains and worried at the roof of Eli Mercer's cabin, feeling for loose shingles and weak nails. Eli knew every sound the place could make. He knew the click of the cottonwood branch against the chimney, the low complaint of the barn door, and the dry hiss of mice beneath the grain bins. He knew how many logs the stove would take before midnight and how much coffee remained by the weight of the tin. He kept his life measured because measured things did not surprise a man. Each morning he fed the 2 workhorses, milked the red cow, and counted the calves in the south pasture. He checked the same stretch of fence where elk sometimes pushed through. He ate salt pork and biscuits at a table built for 4, then washed 1 plate and set it upside down beside the basin. There were 2 bedrooms in the cabin, but only 1 was used. The other had stayed closed for 6 years. Dust softened the latch. Eli passed that door every night without touching it. The country around his homestead was wide enough to make a man feel forgotten. The nearest town, Bell Crossing, lay 18 miles east, beyond 2 ridges and a river ford that turned treacherous after rain. A neighbor lived 7 miles north, though smoke had not risen from that chimney since the old couple moved to Oregon in spring. Eli preferred the distance. Distance asked nothing. It did not offer condolences or speak his wife's name in a lowered voice. It did not watch him buy flour for one. On the 27th of September, clouds gathered over the western peaks before noon. The horses lifted their heads toward the smell of rain. Eli was repairing a gate hinge when thunder rolled across the valley. He carried his tools into the barn and barred the doors. The first drops struck the roof like thrown gravel. Within minutes, the yard became brown water, and the creek rose against its banks. Eli had just reached the porch when he heard something beneath the rain. Not thunder, a horse. He took the lantern from its hook and walked to the edge of the yard. At first, he saw only sheets of water and the gray blur of sage. Then a small wagon appeared on the north track, leaning badly to one side. A woman walked beside it, pulling at the bridle of a trembling bay mare. 2 children huddled beneath the wagon cover. The left rear wheel struck a rut and broke apart. The wagon dropped with a crack. The mare lurched. The woman fell to one knee in the mud, but did not release the reins. Eli crossed the yard at a run. "Easy," he called to the horse. "Hold her steady." The woman looked up. Rain streamed from the brim of her black bonnet. She had a narrow face, pale with cold, and dark hair plastered against one cheek. "My children," she said. "I see them." Eli reached the wagon and lifted the cover. A boy of perhaps 9 held a smaller girl against his chest. Both were wet. The girl shivered so hard her teeth clicked. "Barn first," Eli said. He carried the girl. The boy followed without being told. The woman led the mare, limping slightly but keeping pace. Together they reached the barn while the storm closed over the broken wagon behind them. Inside, Eli wrapped the children in horse blankets and set them on a mound of clean hay. The boy watched every movement with the fixed, suspicious stare of a child who had learned that adults could fail. "What's your name?" Eli asked him. "Samuel Hale." "And hers?" "Nell." The woman removed her bonnet. "I'm Clara Hale, their mother." Eli nodded once. "Mercer." Another gust shook the barn. Clara looked toward the doors, as if she meant to go back for their belongings. "Leave it," Eli said. "Nothing out there is worth a broken neck." Her mouth tightened. "Everything we own is in that wagon. It will still be there when the water drops." She looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her eyes. It was not agreement. It was surrender to the weather. Eli brought them into the cabin. He gave Clara a dry shirt and an old pair of trousers that had belonged to his younger brother. For the children, he found wool blankets and 2 shirts from the cedar chest in the unused room. He opened that room for the first time in 6 years. The air smelled of cedar, dust, and something faintly floral that had survived longer than it should have. A quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. On the dresser sat a blue glass bottle and a wooden hairbrush with 3 dark strands caught in its bristles. Eli took the shirts and shut the door quickly. Clara noticed. She said nothing. While she helped the children change behind a blanket hung across the kitchen, Eli heated beans and added the last piece of ham. The boy ate fast. The girl tried to hold the spoon, but her hands shook. Clara guided it without speaking. By nightfall, the storm had washed out the track and turned the ford into a boiling ribbon of brown water. There would be no journey to Bell Crossing. Eli made a bed for the children near the stove and gave Clara his mattress. He carried a blanket to the barn for himself. She followed him to the porch. The rain had softened, but the wind was colder now. Clara held his borrowed coat closed at her throat. "Mr. Mercer." He turned. "Can we stay until morning?" The question was plain, yet something beneath it made him pause. She was not only asking about the storm, she was asking whether the door would remain open through the dark. "Until morning," he said. Clara nodded. "Thank you." Eli slept badly in the barn. He woke twice to the mare stamping, and once to silence so complete that he thought snow had fallen. Morning brought low clouds, a flooded creek, and half the wagon wheels scattered across the yard. The north track was gone beneath mud. Eli found Clara standing on the porch in her damp black dress, looking toward the road. "Ford won't be safe today," he said. "Tomorrow? Maybe." She pressed her lips together. "I can pay for the food." "With what?" The words came out harder than he intended. Clara straightened. "With work." He saw then that pride was the one possession the storm had not soaked through. "There are potatoes in the shed," he said. "They need sorting." By noon, she had sorted every potato, scrubbed the kitchen floor, mended a tear in one blanket, and set bread dough to rise. Samuel gathered broken spokes from the yard. Nell sat on the porch step and lined them up by length. The next day, Eli rode to the ford. Water still covered the crossing stones. A dead pine had lodged against the bank, making the current twist fast and deep. When he returned, Clara was repairing Samuel's coat with thread pulled from the hem of her own dress. "Another day," Eli said. She nodded, but he saw relief move across her face before she hid it. On the 3rd morning, they walked together to the wagon. One axle was split. The flour sack had burst. Rain had ruined 2 mattresses and most of the children's clothes. In a small wooden trunk, Clara found papers wrapped in oilcloth, a tintype of a solemn man, and a few coins. Eli examined the axle. "I can cut a new one." "How long?" 3 days if the wood behaves." Clara looked toward the children. Samuel was trying to free a tin cup from the mud. Nell stood beside him, wearing Eli's old shirt like a dress. "Then we'll work 3 days," Clara said. Eli did not ask where they were going. She did not offer. He shaped the axle beneath the barn awning. Clara hauled the salvaged goods into the shed and spread damp clothing across ropes near the stove. Samuel followed Eli from task to task, always a few steps behind. The boy handed him nails before he asked, and gathered shavings for kindling. On the 2nd evening, Eli found a bowl of stew covered beside the stove. Clara and the children had already eaten. She had left the lamp burning low for him. He stood over the bowl longer than hunger required. The repaired wagon was ready on the 6th day. So was the Ford. The sky had cleared, though a dark line of clouds rested beyond the mountains. Clara packed their few dry belongings. Samuel harnessed the mare under Eli's supervision. Nell carried 3 apples from the cellar and placed them carefully beneath the wagon seat. When all was ready, Clara took the oilcloth papers from her trunk. There was a teaching position in Bell Crossing. My husband's cousin wrote that the school board needed someone before harvest. Eli waited. The letter is 4 months old. Thomas died 2 weeks after it arrived. Fever. Her thumb moved across the folded edge. I stayed until the debts took the house. His cousin moved on in August. I did not know until we reached Fort Laramie. You have no position waiting. No. And no family in Bell Crossing. No. Samuel stared at the ground. Nell held the hem of her mother's dress. Eli looked at the road. The next storm would bring snow to the high slopes. Bell Crossing had a hotel, but it cost money. Work was scarce after harvest. A woman with 2 children and 7 coins would find little kindness that did not carry a price. He could have wished them well. He had done all that decency required. Instead, he heard himself say, "I need help bringing in the potatoes." Clara studied his face. "And the winter wood isn't stacked," he added. "I can pay a little. You can use the spare room until the work is done." Samuel looked up first. Clara's voice was careful. "How long would that be?" "A few weeks." The wind turned one dry cottonwood leaf across the yard. "Then we'll stay a few weeks," she said. The unused room changed slowly. Clara washed the curtains and beat dust from the quilt. She moved the blue bottle and hairbrush into the dresser drawer, but did not throw them away. Samuel slept on a pallet beside the bed. Nell slept beneath the quilt with her mother. Eli never entered without knocking. The days settled into a rhythm that none of them named. Before sunrise, Eli stirred the stove. By the time he returned from the barn, coffee waited in the pot. Clara kneaded dough while Samuel fed the chickens. Nell carried 3 eggs at a time in the fold of her apron, walking with grave concentration. They dug potatoes until their backs ached. Clara worked beside Eli, her hands reddened by cold earth. When she found a rotten one, she tossed it into a separate basket. When he lifted a full sack, she held the mouth closed without being asked. At noon, they ate in the field. Samuel talked little. Nell talked enough for all of them. She told the potatoes where they were going. She named the milk cow Button, though the cow already had a name. Eli corrected her twice, then stopped. One afternoon, Nell fell asleep against a sack. Eli laid his coat over her. Clara saw him do it from across the field. She returned to digging. The next morning, the missing button on his work shirt had been replaced. The first snow dusted the peaks in early October. It melted before reaching the valley, but Eli began cutting wood in earnest. That doesn't mean that ripples are not felt down to this day. The boy was too small for the crosscut saw, so Eli taught him to split kindling. "Watch the grain," Eli said. Samuel studied the log. His first strike glanced off. The second buried the hatchet head. On the 5th, the wood opened with a clean crack. The boy looked at Eli. "Again," Eli said. That evening, Samuel carried in an armful of straight pieces and laid them beside the stove. Clara ran one hand over his hair. The boy pretended not to notice. Eli repaired the wagon cover. Clara patched his winter gloves. He built a shelf above the kitchen table because her jars crowded the counter. She filled the shelf with dried beans, herbs, and late blackberries cooked down with sugar. Nothing was discussed. Usefulness became their common language. On Sundays, Clara read from a small book of poems after supper. Her voice was low and steady. Samuel listened while whittling. Nell leaned against her mother. Eli sat near the stove and cleaned harness buckles that did not need cleaning. The first time Clara laughed, it surprised all of them. Nell had attempted to milk Button and received a slap of the cow's tail across her face. She stood with milk on her nose, outraged beyond speech. Clara's laugh came suddenly, rusty at first, then clear. Samuel smiled. Even Eli's mouth changed. Nell pointed at him. "You laughed too." "No, I didn't. Your eyes did." After that, the cabin seemed to hold sound differently. The weeks passed. Potato sacks filled the cellar. Split wood climbed in neat rows beneath the lean-to. Clara rendered fat, dried apples and turned one of Eli's worn blankets into 2 small coats. Samuel reset a sagging section of fence with Eli. Nell followed them carrying a hammer she was never permitted to use. At meals, Eli's plate no longer sat alone. He began buying more coffee, more flour, and small pieces of hard candy when he rode into town. He left the candy in a jar without explanation. Nell found it every time. Clara never asked him about the woman whose things remained in the drawer. Eli never asked why she still wore her wedding ring while kneading bread. Their dead lived quietly beside them. There was room enough, if no one spoke too loudly. Near the end of October, Eli came in from the pasture with blood on his sleeve. A calf had kicked the fence rail while he was fastening wire, driving a splinter into his forearm. Clara set down the knife she was using. "Sit. It's nothing. Sit." He obeyed, more from surprise than pain. She boiled water, cleaned the cut, and pulled the splinter free with tweezers. Her fingers were firm. When Eli flinched, she waited without apology, then continued. "My husband hated doctors," she said. "By the time I got him to one, there was nothing to do." Eli looked at the side of her face. "If that reddens, we ride to town," she said. "All right." It was the first promise she asked from him. 2 days later, he found the wound rewrapped with clean linen while he slept in the chair. He did not remember her touching him. The next week, Eli opened the barn loft and brought down a child's wooden sled. One runner had split. He repaired it after dark and left it by the porch. Nell discovered it at sunrise. Her shout sent chickens scattering across the yard. The hill behind the cabin held only a finger of snow, but she dragged the sled to the top. Samuel pushed her. The runners scraped more earth than ice. Still, Nell flew down laughing, bonnet strings behind her. Clara stood beside Eli on the porch. "Was it hers?" she asked. Eli knew whom she meant. "Our daughters," he said. Clara waited. Her name was Rose. She was 5 when she died. Pneumonia. My wife followed the next spring. The words felt like stones carried too long in a coat pocket. Clara did not say she was sorry. She placed her hand on the porch rail beside his, close but not touching. Below them, Nell demanded another ride. Rose would have liked the noise, Eli said. That night, the hairbrush and blue bottle remained inside the drawer. The sled stayed by the door. On the first day of November, a rider came from Bell Crossing. Eli recognized Deputy Ward Bell by the brass star pinned crookedly to his coat. Bell was a broad man with a red beard and a habit of smiling before delivering unpleasant news. Clara saw him through the window. The cup in her hand struck the table hard enough to spill coffee. Bell dismounted. "Morning, Mercer." "Ward." The deputy looked past him toward the cabin. "I hear you've got Clara Hale staying here." Eli did not ask who had told him. Clara stepped onto the porch. Samuel stood behind her, one hand on Nell's shoulder. Bell removed his hat. "Mrs. Hale, I've got a notice from Cheyenne County." She did not move. Your husband owed money to Mr. Silas Rusk. Feed, wagon repairs, and a cash note. Rusk says the mare and wagon were named as security. The wagon is all we have, Clara said. Belle's smile disappeared. I know it. He unfolded a paper. The amount was nearly 3 times what the mare and wagon were worth. That signature isn't Thomas's, Clara said. Belle glanced at the page. Rusk swears it is. He tried to buy our place after Thomas died. I refused. Then he appeared with debts I had never seen. Court and Bell Crossing can hear it on the 15th. And, until then, Eli asked, property listed as security stays in place. Nobody sells it or leaves the county. Bell looked uncomfortable. There's more. Rusk petitioned the judge concerning the children. Says Mrs. Hale lacks settled employment or a lawful residence. Says his sister in Cheyenne can take them temporarily. Samuel's face went white. Clara stepped in front of him. No. It's only a petition, Bell said. Judge hasn't signed anything. He will if Rusk pays him. Bell put his hat back on. I didn't say that. You didn't need to. After the deputy left, Clara went inside and began packing. Eli found her folding the children's coats into the trunk. Bell said the wagon stays. We can walk south tonight. There are freight wagons on the Cheyenne Road. With snow coming? I will not let Rusk take them. Her hands shook, but she kept folding. Running makes his story stronger, Eli said. She turned on him. You think a court cares which story is true? Samuel and Nell watched from the doorway. Eli lowered his voice. I think 2 children walking into a November storm may not reach another court. Clara stopped. Outside, the wind drove dry leaves against the wall. One slipped through the door and skittered across the floor. Stay until the hearing, Eli said. And if we lose? He had no answer. That evening, Clara unpacked the coats. The days before the hearing changed the cabin's rhythm. Samuel woke from dreams and checked that his mother was still beside him. Nell stopped asking when snow would come. Clara worked harder than before. Eli rode twice to Bell Crossing. He spoke with the school board, the hotel keeper, and the clerk who recorded loans. The school had hired a teacher in August. The hotel keeper remembered Silas Rusk asking where the Hale family had gone. The clerk found no copy of Thomas Hale's note. None of it was enough. On his second visit, Eli saw Rusk outside the courthouse. He was thin, clean-shaven, and dressed in a dark coat too fine for the mud. Mercer, Rusk said, you've taken an unusual interest. Doesn't feel unusual. Rusk smiled. A solitary man, a young widow under his roof. The judge may find the arrangement improper. Eli's hands closed at his sides. Careful, Rusk said softly. One question about your character can become 2. Eli walked away because striking him would help no one. That night, snow began. It came softly at first, filling hoofprints and whitening the woodpile. By midnight, wind pressed it against the windows. Clara sat at the kitchen table with Rusk's paper before her. Eli stood by the stove. You should tell them to leave, she said. Who? The court. The town. Rusk. Tell them I came in a storm and overstayed. Tell them you want your house back. That would be a lie. It would keep your name out of it. Eli added a log to the fire. Sparks climbed inside the stove. My name has survived worse than gossip. Your land may not. Rusk knows men in the bank. Let him know them. Clara looked tired then, not weak, but worn down to the place where strength had to be chosen one breath at a time. Why are you doing this? She asked. Eli looked toward the closed bedroom door. A line of light showed beneath it. The children were awake, listening. He sat across from her. 6 years ago, I thought if I kept every door shut, nothing else could be taken. Clara's eyes stayed on his. It didn't work, he said. The house was still empty. Snow brushed the window like fingertips. You asked to stay until morning, he continued. Morning came. I should have told you then, but I didn't know it yet. Tell me what? You don't have to leave. Clara's breath caught, though her face hardly changed. Not after the hearing, Eli said. Not by winter. Not because Rusk says you have no home. She looked down at her wedding ring. I can't promise what you think I can. I'm not asking for a promise. Then what are you asking? Stay because this is your home if you want it. Yours, Samuel's, and Nell's. Whatever name we give it can wait. For a long while, only the stove spoke. Clara placed both palms flat on the table. I have been afraid to unpack the trunk. I know. I thought if I kept it ready, leaving would hurt less. Eli nodded. It doesn't, she said. No. She reached across the table. Her hand stopped halfway, uncertain. Eli closed the remaining distance and took it. The bedroom door opened. Samuel stood there in his nightshirt. Does that mean we can stay? He asked. Eli looked at Clara. She wiped one cheek with her free hand. It means we're going to court, she said. Samuel frowned. Then she added, and afterward, we're coming home. The storm blocked the road for 3 days. On the 4th, Eli hitched both workhorses to a sleigh. Clara wore her black dress. Samuel carried the oilcloth packet. Nell wore the coat made from Eli's old blanket. The courthouse was crowded. Rusk had made certain of that. Judge Caro examined the disputed note and listened while Rusk described Clara as destitute and transient. He spoke gently, which made every lie sound reasonable. Then Eli stood. He did not give a speech. He placed his deed on the judge's desk, along with a written agreement granting Clara paid work and permanent lodging on his homestead for as long as she chose. She has employment, Eli said. She has a residence. The children have beds, food, and schooling at home until spring. Rusk's attorney questioned the propriety of the arrangement. Clara answered before Eli could. Mr. Mercer gave us shelter when the road washed out. Since then, I have earned my keep, and he has treated me and my children with respect. If the court doubts my character because a decent man opened his door, then the court may say so plainly. The room went still. Samuel then handed the judge the oilcloth packet. Inside was Thomas Hale's Army discharge paper and 3 letters bearing his signature. The judge compared them with the note. The hand was not the same. Judge Caro dismissed Rusk's claim and ordered the note sent to the county prosecutor. He denied the petition concerning the children without hearing further argument. Rusk left through a side door. Outside, snow fell over Bell Crossing. Clara stood on the courthouse steps with one hand on Samuel's shoulder and the other holding Nell's. Ready? Eli asked. Clara looked toward the sleigh. Yes. They rode west beneath a pale sky. The children slept under buffalo robes while the horses pulled steadily through the drifts. At the last ridge, the homestead appeared below them, chimney smoke bending east in the wind. Clara saw it and let out a breath she seemed to have held since September. Winter settled hard over the valley. Snow buried the wagon track and climbed halfway up the pasture fence. The creek froze. At night, wolves called from the northern hills, and the cabin windows shone against the dark. The trunk in Clara's room was finally emptied. Samuel's books went on the new shelf. Nell placed 3 stones, a bird's feather, and 1 precious piece of candy in the blue glass bottle. Clara laid Thomas's tintype beside the wooden hairbrush, not hidden in a drawer, but resting openly on the dresser with the things that had belonged to Rose's mother. No one objected to the dead sharing a little space. Eli built Samuel a proper bed. Clara sewed curtains from flour sacks. Nell hung a crooked paper star over the kitchen table and declared it was still Christmas, even though December had barely begun. One evening, wind piled snow against the door. Eli came in from the barn and found 4 plates set on the table. Clara stood at the stove. Samuel read aloud while Nell corrected words she did not know herself. Eli removed his coat and hung it beside the others. Clara passed him a cup of coffee. Their fingers touched and stayed that way for a quiet second. "Cold?" she asked. "Not in here." After supper, Samuel barred the shutters. Nell pushed another log into the stove with Eli's help. Clara closed the door against the wind and turned the latch. Outside, winter held the whole valley in white silence. Inside, nobody was waiting for morning so they could leave.